Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this started. Let's see, I'm trying to let all these people in. I'm going to welcome everyone to today's webinar on gross margin management as part of our Profit Leader Masterclass series. I'm Christy Speed, Marketing Director at FMS. Before we dive in, I have a few quick notes. This session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel for viewing later. Please feel free to use the Q&A section for any questions during the presentation, and don't hesitate to express your thoughts with the reaction button. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Stan McClintock. Stan has a rich background in the grocery industry, starting from the age of 14. After graduating in marketing from the University of Tennessee, Stan advanced through roles at Kroger and Bilo, and later worked at Malone and Hyde, Fleming, and AWG. His extensive expertise covers store operations to financial strategies. Today, Stan is here to share his insights to help retailers enhance their gross margins. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you, Christy. Appreciate it a lot. Appreciate Christy's hard work in putting all this together. None of this would be happening without Christy. So she's great. She does us a great job. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first of 6 webinars that we're having in 2024. This one here, Gross Margin Enhancement. We'll look at the best practices and what the best retailers are doing to have the highest gross margins out there to help us along the way. Some of the here's our agenda. I just want to say thanks to everyone for attending. I know you guys are very busy with your schedules, and thanks for tuning in. Some of the ground rules really have to do around technology. Looking over the list of stores that are on the webinar today, we have single store operators out there who are using some technology, and we have some retailers out there that are using OCR and AI intelligence and the latest and greatest in technology to help pull their gross margin together. So I don't want to get into the weeds too much on the how to do some of this. A lot of this is just, particularly the ones who have been in the business a long time, is reminders of things we should be doing to protect our gross margin, and maybe a few little new things along the way that we can pick up and learn. So the agenda today basically is the definition of gross margin, obviously why it's important, what's in your gross margin, how do you calculate it, your pricing strategy, how that figures into your gross margin, how often do the best performers take inventory. We'll have John Klein, our FMS COO, talk to us a little bit about that. We'll talk about shrink and known loss, and we'll talk about AI intelligence and puzzle and looking at our gross margins going forward. And then we'll cover some other best practices affecting our gross margin. So what is gross margin? If you were to go out there and Google it, you're going to get gross margin equal revenue minus cost of goods sold divided by your revenue. So in our industry, obviously it's our POS sales for whatever period of time we're measuring gross margin at, minus our cost of goods sold for whatever that period of time is, divided back by our retail sales. So in the example here, it's 50%. So pretty simple to calculate and know, but the question is does your people know how to calculate gross margin? And a lot of times we get invoices into our stores and we tell the department manager, okay, I want 35% gross margin on that, but do they really know how to calculate the gross margin? So I would challenge you to go back and ask them to show you how they're calculating gross margin. And I think you might be surprised at what you might see is the way some of them are calculating gross margins. Same thing with retail pricing. When we ask them to extend the retails a lot of times, and we ask them to put retails on their cost, how they're calculating and getting to that retail. Once again, I think you might be surprised as how they're calculating those retails. I'm not going to get too much into supermarket math. That's another class or another day, but that's two of the things I think you really need to go back and take a look at is how they're calculating those things. So what goes into building your going in gross margin? What do you need to know? Well, most of us have a single supplier or one main supplier for our stores, along with a bunch of other secondary suppliers or jobbers, whatever you want to call them. So whether it's CNS or UNFI or AWG or Mitchell Grocery, or there's a whole bunch of them. Generally, at the end of the week, you'll get a statement from them. And on that statement, it'll have the retails on some things and the cost on everything. And so when you get that statement, obviously you're checking off to make sure the costs are right. And most of the things will have retails on them, but some of them sometimes do not have the retails on them. So what you would need to do for things like your random weight meats, you would need to go in there and assign a retail to it if you're going to calculate what your actual margin is. Far as what's coming in the back door, because you got to have what the retail is on it. So you need to go extend the invoices of the invoices that aren't extended far as retail, and there's different ways of doing that. And some of you have price genies and a lot of other technology stuff to help you do that. But if you don't, I mean, a down and dirty way to do it is, for example, box meat. When you get it in, if you've done cutting tests, you generally know that if you get box meat in from a certain manufacturer, this is what this box meat's going to get me in retail if I properly merchandise it. So you can take it by that percentage for that vendor and take it up, or if you've got a more sophisticated system and got the time, you can actually extend it by item. But what most people do is they'll take that vendor and extend it by vendor. So if it's a beer and wine or a liquor guy who's coming in, and a lot of times they just have the cost on them, they don't have your retail on them. If you know that from experience, that guy's getting you a 20% margin, you would take the whole invoice and multiplies 25% to get your retail. But you got to have retails on things. If we're going to measure retail going out the front door, we got to know what the retail going in the back door is to know what we're losing in the middle there. So it gets back into shrink, and we're going to talk about shrink. So shrink's the definition. The definition of shrink is the difference in the retail that comes in the back door and the retail that goes out the front door. Everything that we lose in the middle is shrink. So if we're really going to watch our gross margin, we got to know what that shrink level is as we're going through. So to go along with your gross margin is your pricing strategy. So I know that the first of this year, there was like 20 some odd states that had minimum wage increases, and a lot of retailers says, well, I'll just have to raise my retails in my store so I can raise my gross margin so I can cover the increase in cost. And for some of us, that's what we needed to do. And for some of us, I would say, are you sure? And obviously there's problems with raising your retails in your store, and that is all the different the low cost people that are around you, the Walmarts of the world that are sitting around you, and the differences in your prices and their prices already. Are you sure you really want to go up on that retail? And sometimes you may need to, but you've got to look at what your going in gross margin is, and the difference in, like I say, what's coming in your back door and what's going out your front door. And if we're losing a lot in between, maybe we can cut out the loss we're losing in between and not have to go up on those retails that we're charging to our customer. So a couple of weeks ago, I was down at a seminar down in Florida, and I was talking with a gentleman named John Heitman. He works with Price Dimensions, and he used to work with Willard Bishop Consulting Group. A lot of you are familiar with him. They're price gurus and consultants in the industry. And he was going over what is your retail pricing strategy for your stores. And John does hundreds of price comparisons every year. He does them for the Kroger company. He does them for mid-sized chains. He does them for single store operators. He's all over the board in who he works with, but he's done hundreds and hundreds of price comparisons that he does every year. And what he's learned over the years is if your retails in your store, if they're between 0 and 5% of the price leader, whoever that price leader is around you, and for a lot of it's Walmart. The customers aren't going to notice if you're 0 to 5% higher than what they are. If your retails are between 5 and 10% higher, customers generally aren't going to leave them as long as you give them another reason to stay with you. So what's your niche? What are you known for? What are you doing to make them drive by the Walmart to get to your store to shop with you instead of going to that low price guy? So sometimes it's your location, sometimes it's signature items, sometimes it's the best meat department, etc. Is the reason you would do that. If you're 10% or more than the low price leader in your market, generally you will become a secondary store, or they'll cherry pick you. They'll just cherry pick what's in your ad, or if you got something hot on TPR, they'll cherry pick you, or they'll leave you altogether if you're not giving them a reason to shop with you. When John works with Kroger, and I use Kroger as an example because they're an excellent retailer, and they're large and they're big and they've been around a long time and they continue to grow. Kroger stays within 10% of the price leader in their market, is what the Kroger will do. So if it's Walmart, they're within 10% of where Walmart is, and they're not really going to worry about getting a whole lot lower than that because they do a lot of other things that Walmart doesn't do to have people shopping in their stores and not a Walmart store. But it's interesting to also point out who they perceive to be in the same channel of doing business as they are. They generally don't look at Dollar General or Aldi or Save a Lot or Lidl or those kinds of folks when they say they're going to be within 10% of the price leader, because they'll consider them a different channel and a different format and not what we would consider a traditional grocery store. So it's interesting to know that that's what they're looking at. So my question to you are where are you at with your prices with the price leader in your market, and do you know? Because you should. What are 6 ways to communicate pricing? Obviously, you have your everyday base price in your store, your tags on the shelf in your store. You have promotional pricing, your TPR pricing, your ad pricing in your store, and a lot of us play the high-low game, where we hire on the shelf and we heat our promotional pricing up to hopefully pull them in, and they'll do the rest of the shopping with us. And some of us are more of the everyday low cost type retailer. So we've got different formats that we're talking to here today, but no matter what it is, you still need to know where you're at compared to the price leader in your market. So but you're communicating your pricing with your shelf tags, your promotional pricing, your known value items. Your known value items are the key price sensitive items in your particular market. And the known value items aren't the same all across the country. I mean, there's so many regional brands that go into the known value items. Known value items are going to be different for conventional stores than what they are for Hispanic stores, than they are going to be for limited assortment stores. So you need to know what's your top SKUs in your store. And on those top SKUs in your stores, are you price competitive, particularly on those price SKUs in your store? One of the many jobs I've had over the years is I was the retail pricing manager for a large wholesaler in the middle part of the country. And even back then, I told retailers, I go, why would you want some pinhead in the office determining what your retails are, particularly on your known value items? You need to get out. You need to check your competitors to see where they're at on those items. And sometimes you can go up on your retails, and sometimes you might have to go down on your retails. But you need to know the known value items throughout the store, not just grocery, but in your meat and your produce and your deli, bakery, etc. Number 4 on there is your value image assortment, and that's and generally the number of SKUs that you're carrying in your store gets into your image assortment. We generally like to have a low cost item in every category that we got in our stores. And for most of us, that's our private label. And making sure that you're locating your private label in the right positions on the shelf, you're merchandising your private label, you're carrying the private label. Most of the wholesalers have at least two kinds of private label. They have what they call their premium private label, and then their secondary private label. And you need to make sure you're carrying both of those, particularly if you've got the limited assortment store sitting around you. You really need that second private label to compete against those guys. Our merchandising obviously communicates our pricing. What's on your end caps? How often do you change your end caps? Are they the lowest priced items in your stores? And what are we doing to communicate that pricing? And in today's market, particularly in today's market with inflation running the way inflation's been running, I mean, we're looking at almost close to 30% inflation over the last 3 years in grocery. So you have a whole lot of American consumers who are really, really struggling to make ends meet. So when they from the time they pull into your parking lot to the time they walk in the front door and they shop your store, you need to be shouting price to them. We've lowered thousands of prices, or we got thousands of items on deal, and on the signage throughout the store, you need to show them how much they're saving over the regular cost. But you need to be pointing out that savings to them, and you need to be communicating to them because I walk in a lot of stores. Not a lot, but I walk in some stores and the TPRs are really lacking in the store, or lack thereof, and the communication about pricing is just not to be found in the signage program anywhere. And if you're not telling your customers you're competitive, and inflation's gone up 30% the last year, all they're going to see is high prices. So you've got to point out the savings to them for them to see the savings, and that's just really important to do that. So at the end of the workshop I was at down in Florida, I was talking with John Heitman, and I asked him, so John, you do hundreds of things, these price comparisons all over the U.S. Where's the typical independent priced according to where Walmart's generally at? And he says typically the typical independent's between 12 and 20% higher than their local Walmart is. And if Kroger's under 10%, I would say we really, really need to work at getting under 10% or under where the local Walmart is if we're going to be a long-term player in the market. Or you really need to have some really strong niches that you're known for with signature items, or by far the best meat department in town, or something to pull them into your stores. Got John Klein. John is our COO of FMS, and John's going to talk to us about how often we should be doing inventory so we're getting correct readings on our gross margins. John?
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate everybody being here today. It's a really large attendance. I think that probably speaks volumes to the fact that we're all seeing challenges on our bottom lines today, because if you think about March 20 and forward, for about 2.5 years or so, margins were absolutely fantastic. 2021, unbelievably good, right? Frankly, a little bit of inflation is always good for grocery stores. Retailers, we make money with food on the shelf. We're seeing margins normalize now this year, especially back down to 23, back half of 23, especially back to 2019 levels. But as Stan said earlier, we've seen a lot of pressure on your expense line, minimum wage increases, utility increases, insurance I saw was up 20% over last year. So a lot of reasons to quantify your gross margins, right? And as Stan said, understanding that reconciliation of going in gross to going out gross. Some of that is going to be, reconciliation of your sale plan, i.e. you had more participation in your ads than thought, etc. A key component, however, certainly is that old notion of I'm taking my beginning inventory, I'm taking an ending inventory. That change is going to feather into cost of goods, plus or minus, depending on what it did. I am a huge believer in monthly perishable counts or period perishable counts, not necessarily monthly, quarterly to trimester. I think is the rule of thumb for that I agree with for counting center store. Obviously, there's not one solution that fits everybody. Small stores, really small. We spoke to some folks in New York City recently. Those stores, they know what's in them. They're so small, they know. So, but generally speaking, that's what I want to see. And if you're having issues with perishable margins, count weekly, right? It's pretty easy to roll inventory, but it's an important tool in your, in your arsenal, if you will, to understanding your margin, pinpointing shrink. Our annual survey is clear that the people that make the most money are the ones who have excellent shrink control. Counting inventories is a key part of that. Stan? Not sure is this still me?
Dan, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Christy. And I had a losing my voice, so I had a lodge and thing in my throat to help me talk here. So anyway, so what's your known loss by department in your store? And please don't confuse your known losses to your overall shrink. I'm talking to retailers a lot of times, and they think their known loss is their shrink. Like I said earlier, the shrink is all the things that we lose in between the back door and the front door. What's your ad markdown by department? And are you measuring your ad markdown? Most of your POS systems can measure the ad markdown for you. And are you tracking your shrink? And is tracking shrink important? According to NGA, according to FMI, according to the surveys that FMS puts out every year, the financial surveys, stores who have a shrink program and measure shrink put about 1% more on the bottom line. So think about what your bottom line is. Think of what percent you're putting on your bottom line. Think about what those dollars are, and what would that look like if you put 1% more on the bottom line. So it's a big deal to know what your shrink is and to track shrink. Are you prosecuting shoplifters and employees who steal from you? Some retailers do, some retailers don't. I know district attorneys in some areas are more aggressive than others, but we need to do what we can do to get district attorneys in all the areas prosecuting shoplifters the best we can. Do you know what your inventory turns are by department? And I think inventory turns are one of the most important numbers that is least talked about in the industry. Generally, I can pick up a P&L and look at inventory turns, and if your inventory turns are good, generally you're making money, and if your inventory turns are below average, then you're not making money. It's just real simple how fast you turn your product over. What does your back room look like? Is it neat? Is it straight? Is it organized? Is everything in its place? How does merchandising play into your gross margin where you've got displays? Are you changing them out regularly? Are you taking advantage of private label to get the highest gross margin in your store? Are you cross merchandising with J-hook programs and shelf extenders and doing all the things that you should be doing across the store as far as cross merchandising in every department? That should help your sales and your gross margin. What's your sign program look like? When we're looking at TPRs and looking at ads, we generally look, this is what our ad program cost us last week, but there's new AI intelligence out there with Puzzle that actually looks forward. And I want Matt to spend just a minute or two talking about Puzzle and what they do.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Stan. So as Stan's been talking about, it's no surprise to anyone that the independent world is facing really serious profit pressure. The data suggests that it's on average, independents are making 1% to 2%. And that's complicated by the fact that week to week and period to period, there might be swings in that profitability of 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 or 5%. What makes this business really, really complicated is that most grocers don't understand those swings until 6 to 12 weeks after the fact. And so it's no wonder that grocers are forced to be conservative with their pricing. They can't afford to take the risk of being aggressive with low pricing because they don't see what they don't see. And unfortunately, it's also a fact, and the data is clear, that each year, 1% of the independent shopper base is walking out the front door and walking into places like Walmart and not coming back. And that's exactly why we created Puzzle. Stan, could you move to the next slide?
Sure.
So Puzzle is an AI-based gross margin manager that gives independents a hyper-accurate look into the future. We can tell you what your margins will be 6 to 12 weeks in advance. And then we give you a toolkit to help you maximize the dollar profitability that you get from the visibility that we're giving you. Stan, next slide. We've got 80 stores across 10 chains that are currently using Puzzle. And really consistently, they're achieving 4 things. First of all, stores are always hitting their target margins. Because they can see into the future, they can see the future coming at them, and they can course correct, ensuring that they're always hitting the numbers that they need to hit. As well, because we give you SKU level visibility and help you understand how individual SKUs affect your overall gross, we can deliver 1 to 1.5% profit improvement across the board. That's consistent with what we're seeing across our user base. Then, if you use the Puzzle methodology, it's probably about 12 to 14 weeks that our grocers are experiencing a dramatic shift in price image. And then finally, because our AI is really now, after about 3 years, really accurate, stores are using Puzzle as the basis for their promotional ordering, and they're seeing up to a 40% improvement in cash flow. We do all of this for $199 per store per month. We would love to demo the system for you. And so if you've got questions, if you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to Stan or anyone on this team, and they'd be glad to set up a demo. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. So what role does DSD receiving have in gross margin? From looking at hundreds of stores, we see that if you've got a DSD system in your store that you're using to receive product into the store, those stores are generally getting about 2 to 3% more in gross margin on those DSD items. But you need to make sure we have the right people at the back door and we have the right standards and methods of checking people in. And Doug in the next webinar will go into a lot more detail on that. Price verification, we got to make sure that everything's ringing up on the right department in the stores. There's technology out there that can help you out with that. The Got Gun, I know if a lot of you use the Got Gun, if you use that when you're ordering product, it does a price verification as you're ordering your product in the store. Do you benchmark your gross margin and shrink and loan loss to other stores? So how do you know if your gross margin and shrink is good? I mean, not all shrink is bad. There is an acceptable level of shrink that you should have or it will affect sales. So what is that for your store? And what is that known loss in your store that you should be running? So if you're a 5-store operator, are you looking at your different stores and how they're benchmarking against each other? And are you benchmarking your stores against other stores? Our next webinar will be coming up on Wednesday, April the 10th. Doug Hayworth will be going into shrink a lot more and talking about ways to control that. Any questions out there right now that we still have time for? Christy, how much time do we have left?
We have a couple of minutes. We do have a question. Someone said we would likely inventory more frequently if we could find a reliable professional inventory service. Do you, FMS, have a solution?
So we don't have one service that we recommend, and from my experience and talking with a lot of other retailers, the inventory crew varies from one part of the country to another part of the country. So if it's a company and they do a great job in one part of the country, it just all depends on the crew that walks into your store. And with turnover happening amongst those folks, it's a lot of time not the best crews in the world. If you're on our GOT systems, and probably a good bit of the stores on this call use our GOT ordering gun, you can use the GOT ordering gun to do your own inventories with the GOT ordering gun. And Doug will talk about that more next time that he's on the call. Anything else right now, Christy?
No, no more questions, but if anybody does have questions, I put in the Q&A emails to Stan or John, either one, if you want to contact them later.
Okay, and we would be happy to talk to you one-on-one on your particular situation in your stores and where you're at. Um, The Financial Symposium at NGA was coming up March 10th through the 12th. That Sunday at NGA, we have the Financial Symposium. It starts at 12:30 that day, that Sunday. If you can't make that and you are at NGA, we'll have actually a couple of booths at NGA. We'll have a large booth right when you walk in the front door there. You can't miss us. So hopefully you'll come and see us at NGA. There's our contact information if you want to shoot us an email or send us anything. We appreciate very much you guys taking the time to be with us today. We tried to be quick, fast, and to the point, and reach out to us if you have any other questions. You guys have a great day, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.